First, as setting the whole stage, my thing would be that if you can make some initial remarks for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then I'll go into a Q&A. We'll keep this discussion to about 30-odd minutes and open this up to the audience as well. So, Mr. Valluri, coming to you first, how would you really look at that how we can inspire innovation and creativity in the state? What is it that we could actually do? Rajiv said something very interesting, that are we a bunch of job seekers or job creators? So how do you really look at this whole proposition?
Thanks, Amit. So, we've heard consultants, we've heard policymakers, we've heard researchers all talk about innovation. I'm going to take a couple of minutes of saying, what's execution on this whole deal about? Truly from an innovation standpoint. I come from a background of more industrial manufacturing IT, but let me just talk about, what could be the potential issues of actually taking a solution to the market. A couple of years ago, some of us actually sat down with the Karnataka state government and actually defined what the industrial policy needs to be. And I was actually looking at some of the numbers of what the industrial policy was. We said there's going to be 170,000 units, 500,000 crores of investment, 1.5 million people for employment, 40,000 acres of land to be acquired, 3,000 megawatts of power to be generated, and about 240 million liters a day of water to be generated for industrial purposes. Now, I don't know whether the gentleman from the government is here or not, but if I really look at 2 years from now, or from the time this industrial policy actually got defined, I don't even know whether 10% of that has actually been accomplished. So there is one piece which says that you lay out a policy which should drive the innovation engine in the state, but you really look at the execution piece, it's very little. And then we come back to, I've heard a number of consulting inputs of, what the innovation should be, what ought to be done, et cetera, et cetera. But my fundamental question is, to folks sitting here, is the way we have driven this market, just from a value creation standpoint, has been so much product driven. The West develops a product, let's go and drive a market for that. Let's create a market for that. But we've never actually done what I would define as a market-based solution creation. We have not looked at what markets truly need in terms of moving up the societal standards and actually drive innovation. So if we even take a look at the 5 basic areas, whether it's water, energy, waste, pollution, healthcare, when you really look at the piece which is really required in terms of driving innovation for these areas where you can actually build products as the society goes up, we never look at in that direction, but what we look at is in the direction of saying, what can we actually innovate? There is ample amount of technology that's available in the world. We don't really need to go about beating this thing or saying, we need to develop technology. Let's get this convergence in it and build solutions as opposed to saying, that we've got to be one great innovation engine to actually look at one single product that needs to be built and actually put into the market. And I think, Amit, that's where I kind of really struggle when you talk about industry, that, if I serve on the Knowledge Commission of Karnataka with Dr. Kasturi Rangan and Mohan. And when I actually look at that, a lake cleaning process in Bangalore suffers so much because we are not able to bring multiple technologies together, put it together, and actually create a solution. Damn it, that's innovation. That's enough for us. Let's get that thing going. But herein, what we will talk about is we must bring in nanosciences into the whole product line and build a nano product and actually get it done. We are not actually getting the societal standards up. So I think there's a fundamental view which we need to think about for India. If innovation needs to be really driven, let's create solutions. Let's create solutions that really ups the standard of living in the country. And let's bring in a whole convergence idea to build in multiple technologies, multiple interventions, whether it's financial, whether it's IT, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's product generation. Let's put that together and actually create a solution. And then what you see is the amount of skill development. Somebody came and talked to me about the other day of, what do we do for IoT skill development? I'm saying, yes, we need IoT, we need machine intelligence, we need drone technologies, we need all that. But at the end of that, if we take all these technologies and actually put it together and create a solution, that's where the engine of innovation begins to happen at really costs which are unique. And to me, I think, Mamit, that's the key, which I think we lack from an execution standpoint. And I think as we go through the discussion, I'm going to give you folks some examples of what some of the organizations are doing of actually driving this convergence approach, which might actually allow this gathering to start thinking not just a product, not just a unit innovation, but really talking about a solution, which is about convergence and then creating markets.
So this is very powerful as to what you're saying. So you're talking about a solution-oriented approach. You're talking about how to create societal progress. You're also saying that how to create that whole Medici effect of bringing technologies together. As an example, could you just say something? You did talk about lakes and cleaning the lakes or whatever. So there is a possible solution there.
I'll give you a very quick example in the interest of time. I chaired a company called Ingersoll Rand for many years. Our engineering development center had a 90% engineering folks serving the global market, so-called global market. Value analysis, value engineering, take costs out, the usual stuff which most companies do. 4 years ago, we said, this engineering design center is going to be blown up. 50% is going to serve the globe, 50% is actually going to serve the Indian market. And one of the problems we said is, what is the problem? We were reasonably good at food security. We said, what is the problem in actually reducing food wastage in the country? We said, let's go and look at that problem as opposed to saying we'll actually generate a product. When we looked at food security, we figured out, there's 30% of food wastage, there's a 150,000 crore market, 120,000 crores is subsidy from the government, so it's a great model. You give subsidy 120,000 crores, you waste food of 150,000 crores, so it's a good engine for some people to kind of keep making money. So when we actually looked at the market, we said, listen, we need to actually fix a solution as opposed to saying we can actually reduce temperatures to allow perishable food not to get wasted. So we worked with Tatas. We said, hey, listen, why don't you actually give us your vehicle? We will actually put an engineering system which will actually reduce the temperature in the refrigerated van. When we went to the market, the farmer said, listen, we are not going to actually pay you money because this compressor is going to run on fuel, because fuel is going to be an additional cost. So there was an automotive industry, there was an HVAC industry, we got an IT industry to collaborate, and we said, monitor the food that goes from farm to fork, and so that we can actually remotely control the temperature of the food which is going from farm to fork. So now you see, you've got three technologies which are actually converging. You're putting a solution together. This didn't require too much of what I would say, go back to the lab and actually start creating a product. This really meant that you converge multiple technologies, but what you're doing is you're actually creating a solution in the market. So this whole debate, Amit, of saying, we need to kind of keep innovating, I think you look at the shelf around the world, there are thousands of technologies available. The problem is we get wrapped into this whole thing of saying, it's got to be built here, we've got to kind of do this, we've got to do that, and you just actually miss the bigger picture of actually getting and fixing the solution for the market. And same exactly goes for Karnataka. I mean, we've got a whole lot of process analytics over here because of the IT industry. We've got a little bit of, pharma. But I think, how do you create a healthcare problem or a healthcare solution? How can we actually converge these two and bring it to the fore? And I think that's what is missing today, in my opinion.
Very interesting. So as product nation, Sharadji, how are you really looking at this problem in terms of solutions, products, bringing things together, finding some unique solutions which are going to solve the problem, and of course, the whole ecosystem space, because what matters here is the ecosystem as well, to really do that, create that continuous chain of ideas and businesses.
So a couple of points. First, let's look at how innovation works. If Graham Bell was to come back today, he won't recognize the communication system that exists. But if he was to come back in 1995, he would have recognized what he left behind. Like just the way Edison would still recognize our electricity distribution system. So you have 50, 60 years of evolutionary slow-paced change, and then 20 years of non-linear sudden change. We are at that cusp for cars. Cars will change more in the next 10, 15 years than they've changed in the last 50 years. We know banking and finance will change more in the next 10, 20 years than it's changed in the last 50 years. Education will go through that, healthcare will go through that. So the question to ask is, what tips something over from glacial evolutionary change to this kind of disruptive nonlinear change? It turns out that the idea is actually very simple. At some point in time, your building blocks for disruptive change become small enough so that combinatorial innovation takes over. Ultimately, if you go back to any of these examples, and, if you go back to the aircraft industry, Charles Wright, the Wright brothers were combinatorial innovators in a bicycle shop, and they beat Langley, who had been blessed with, lots of money by the federal government at that point in time. So in every example, combinatorial innovation wins over organized, systemic, kind of big money, big company innovation. But that happens only when the building blocks are small, so that you can take those Lego pieces, use Erwan's kind of models, and put that together a solution which you wouldn't have been able to think of earlier. So the public policy implications for this and institutional implications for this is to make those smaller building blocks happen. So ironically, the way to solve healthcare is to unbundle healthcare into pieces so that some innovator somewhere can make this happen. And think the power of this. Here is, and this I've not said this in a public forum yet, but my prediction is that the team that will actually win the Google Lunar X Prize, which is a simple task. You have to take a rover to the moon, drive it 500 meters and do experiments and send it back, will be a team here in Bangalore with 40 people. Right? You know why? Because space has, for heaven's sake, become susceptible to combinatorial innovation, right? So the point is that public policy is to make combinatorial innovation possible. And that is possible. Do you think of your own experience? There was a time when you could only buy the BSNL phone. And when BSNL said you can use any phone that you like as long as it complies to our standards, then there was a plethora of choices that were available. And this happened everywhere in the world. Because now I was an entrepreneur who needed to only build that small phone. And I could build it, and hundreds of entrepreneurs got into that business and made that happen. So the public policy implication was to unbundle the phone network from the phone. And that required a push because the incumbents would never want to do it. So unless we now have a public policy posture which says that our public policy is to reward challengers over incumbents, we will never be successful in unbundling. So the only place where this unbundling is working today is technology. Because technology changes every 10 years, so the poor incumbents are anyway out of business. There are no 50-year-old incumbents in technology, and especially IT and software technology. So you can come in, and activists can come in and unbundle it right from day one. That is what happened to communications. And that is what in India has, how many of you use Aadhaar? You believe it or not, Aadhaar is behind the unbundling of the banks in India. Yeah. Because identity, payment, and credit was what put the bank together. And in India, I would say a handful of people, less than a dozen people in 2009-10 have been systematically working on an India stack, which will actually be publicly announced only on December 16th or 18th in Bombay, for 5 years to unbundle the banks. And therefore, State Bank of India will change more dramatically in the next 10 years than it's changed in the last 70 years. So that is the notion. Rest of it to me is all fluff. Frankly, I love to be somewhat critical of this. I think it doesn't really matter at all. It's just talking for all of our benefit.
This is something very powerful. You made two very powerful points. One is that whole unbundling thing, the policy implications, and so on and so forth. And of course, that ecosystem, or the pillars for the ecosystem. So very quick question. What do you think needs to be done on policy front? And what are those basic pillars that you think should be changed or looked at?
See, I think the genie is out of the bottle, first of all. Now we just have to stand in front of it and take credit. Healthcare in India will change dramatically because the fact is, there are innovators here. There is another prize which is going to be decided by end of next year. It's called the Tricorder Prize. The Tricorder Prize says that in a phone form factor costing less than $1,000, you should be able to do full blood pathology, full ECG, disintermediate a primary healthcare physician in 97% of the cases. Wow. And that prize is now in the last leg, and it will be won. It will disintermediate doctors at a scale that we can't think of today. So I think, if you really frankly ask me, just the way the government of India today, the startup revolution has not happened because of the government. They are just trying to get ahead in front of the revolution that is already happening and take credit for it, frankly. So now the question is, can we basically not make stupid decisions? And we have a history of stupid decisions as a country. We are a very open-minded society. We love to take other people's ideas and make them our own. And sometimes we take wrong ideas. I mean, my father worked for Planning Commission, but I'm sitting here to tell you that was a stupid idea, right? I mean, so, we thought that was the way to build a market economy. More recently, we have taken a stupid idea from the New York hedge funds and the Chinese and the Germans, Chinese and the Russians and the Japanese SoftBank guys, that money determines winners in the marketplace, in the entrepreneur marketplace. Now, that's not what, in the Valley, they will never accept that idea. Because in the Valley, the idea is that the challenger, it's an asymmetric warfare, and we are on the side of the challenger will win over the incumbent. Now, it is possible that a government which is blessed with this idea of, paying lip service to the incumbents may buy this idea, and therefore they may set up a table in which the incumbents have more power than ever before. So I think we got to avoid those mistakes. And if we just avoid those stupid mistakes, the genie is already out of the bottle. Change is happening in India at a pace that we can't foresee today.
Ramesh, how do you avoid those stupid mistakes? You were nodding it and you were laughing at it. So I want your point of view.
I love what you're saying.
So how would you really look at this?
So let me go back a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. The one thing that rang from the last speaker's talk. Can you hear me?
Can you hear him at the back? Okay.
Yeah. I think that was a very powerful point, Rajiv. Okay. So when you look at people coming out of institutes, okay, the benchmark there is the salary. Yeah. And he was talking about whether that should be the benchmark or the amount of jobs that person can create. Okay. So I'm saying no innovation is of any consequence if it is not monetizable. So a little bit about the good news. I think it's worth talking about. A place like Karnataka, as far as startups are concerned, is right on top. Today, India has some 3,500 funded startups, I believe, which is going to go up to 12,000 in the next 4 to 5 years. Okay. And Karnataka has a little over 30% of the share of that. Okay. We are at $2.5 billion last year in terms of investment, ahead of Delhi at 1.43 billion, and ahead of Bombay at 0.63 billion. So the good news is that I think, as far as the state is concerned, which is what we're talking about, we are attracting money for starting businesses and creating jobs. It puts us as the 7th most attractive investment destination, startup investment destination in Asia. This is the good news. However, something which Sharad just said, is it small enough to create disruption? This morning, I read about an app which is being created by the traffic police and a bunch of IT guys, young IT guys, which will help to take, for carpooling, which will help to take out 50,000 cars out of the outer ring road. That's innovation. My question is that of the $2.5 billion that's being invested, how much is, like Sharad said, being copied from the West? And how much is fundamental innovation, which is disruptive, small enough to be disruptive, in an arena like this, in a country like this, and create, completely unbenchmarked innovations? That's where I would go.
So when you're talking about unbenchmarked innovation and things, like how do you really push that? How do you really push people to do that right now? Is it automatically happening? Are people ready for it? Because there is always this debate, because there is this whole famous Narayan Murthy statement that India does not innovate. So how would you really look at this whole proposition?
Actually, it depends on what you call innovation. Does it have to be, the big technology busters? Or, for example, somebody put together a water purifier, I think the Tatas, which were very low cost, and it could go to almost everybody. Okay. I think it's important to find out what exactly the problems are. Like the some IT guys and police people getting together to create an app that reduces cars off the road. That's fundamental innovation. It doesn't have to be
coming to the same point as what Mr. Valluri was saying, that it is about solutions, finding those unique, solid solutions for the world.
I would completely agree with that.
Absolutely. So, Harish, how would you really look at this whole proposition of creating an innovation cycle within the state? So we are talking about solutions. We are talking about looking at combinatorial innovations. We are talking about looking at things from a different perspective, and even small ideas which have large impact. How do you really look at this?
Well, I think, if you look at what has happened, it has happened on its own. I don't think anybody said, okay, Bangalore, go and innovate or become the startup capital of India or whatever. There were building blocks which were there, probably slightly by design and more by accident. We had, the combination came together and it happened. What we need to do is get out of the way, right? We need to get out of the way of stopping innovation, which I think Sharat said, we are quite famous at getting ahead of and stopping people from doing things. And what we need to do very fundamentally, particularly in India, also in the state, how do we create a business-friendly climate? I mean, if you look at our doing business ranking, we are 142 out of 186. But if you look at the lowest ranking, it is 184 out of 186 on the ability to fulfill contracts, which means there is a trust deficit in the society for operating. And if we can get that right, I think innovation will take care of itself. I don't think anybody can prescribe, mandate, or drive innovation and say, innovation hereby go happen. Get out of the way and don't impede people who are going there. I think where we also need to look at innovation, and typically when we talk of innovation, we talk of healthcare, we talk of products and things like that. We need to look at societal innovation. We need to look at governance innovation. What are we doing to make our governance better? I mean, we all sit and complain about governance all the time, but is there anything we can do to do that better? How do we, we are sitting in a situation where bulk of this country is going to be urban. And Bangalore is the best example. It's the only city in the state which is thriving, growing. We keep talking of wanting to move things out of Bangalore into other parts of Karnataka. It's not happening. It's not happened. We all sit in, every time we talk of Karnataka, we come back to this thing that everything happens in and around Bangalore, the rest of the state is weak. I don't know. We need to think of how do we enable that sort of change. It's not just that saying Hubli Dharwad or Mangalore or Mysore will take over, two situations come in. So we need to think of governance innovation. We know Bangalore is going to burst. We have traffic problems. We have all kinds of things. How do we govern Bangalore better? Is our current system the right solution to governing Bangalore, or we need to think of something different?
So I'm hearing something very interesting. One is you're saying that governance systems need to be better. We have done it in spite of the government or despite of the government or whatever.
I'm very clear
And they
about
need to be actually getting out of the way.
Yes.
Tell me, what do you think? What are those one or two things they need to do to get out of the way?
Well, I think, first is when they come out with their policies, they need to, stop trying to say we will create what do they call incubator, government-led incubator. I can't see a government-led incubation being successful, right? I mean, they will say they've created quite a few incubators for, animation for this. They've even created a private equity fund, a venture fund. I mean, in a bureaucracy with all the pulls and pressures and governmental restrictions, how can you successfully allow or operate an incubation? I think, leave it to Sharad and his team. They will take care of it. What the government needs to do is, what can I do to help incubation? Now, what is required here is a better environment, better traffic, and reasonable real estate prices. Can I do something to help real estate price become normal? I mean, I know I may not be the most popular guy here to say this, but I think real estate kills more businesses than anybody else. We all love feeling richer and richer with
without a doubt. I think I absolutely agree with you.
Can I do something to bring down real estate prices? I don't need an innovation center, incubator from government of Karnataka. I need more reasonable real estate prices so that I can set up my business much cheaper. The other big thing about innovation is that that 80% of the startups fail, right? Now, if I as a government say, if you fail as a company, now I will put chains around you for 2 years to help you prevent closing your company, because I will make you go to 50,000 government offices to get NOCs before you can close the company. You get out of the way and help me close in 15 days. I don't want you to, because whenever we talk of creation of innovation, we always say, we will help you create a company in 15 days. I don't think it matters. Can we close it faster and let the guy do something else?
Sure.
I just want to build on what Harish said. We are a low trust society, and why that is hurting India in a big way is, remember, we talked about combinatorial innovation, building blocks. Today, the building blocks are actually coming up with groups of people, what are called as social commons. How many here have used Wikipedia in the last, let's say, 1 month? Right? Now think of it. I mean, the article that you read was pulled together by somebody who was not paid for it. You don't even know that person's name. So it isn't even as if that person got, fame. So now there is, however, an engine where people are coming together to build these kind of building blocks, right? Public goods in a way that has never happened in human history in the past. Right? This has never happened in the human history. Now these public goods in technology, in different areas are the ones that allow combinatorial innovation to happen. But for that public goods to exist in social commons, people coming together to build them, you need trust. Now this is the power of Karnataka. Karnataka has become an oasis of high trust. Why is that the case? Is because of the culture. Why is the culture different? Is because of one person sitting here, Ravi Chandar, and I want to mention this. Karnataka, I think Bangalore is the only place in the country where you can have strong opinions that are weakly held. If you go back and if you do that in Chennai, people will say you believe in self-promotion. If Ravi wasn't doing this in Chennai, they'll say Ravi is doing self-promotion for the City Connect. It will not be allowed. If he tries to do it in Delhi, he'll anyway be lost because everybody is doing self-promotions, right? So that's not possible there. So now the hack that Bangalore has, it's saying you are allowed to promote your ideas vociferously, even though they may be unpopular ideas, provided you are doing public good. So you look at Ravi, vocal voice, critical voice, public good. Mohan Das Pai, same. Kiran Majumdar Shah, same. And I think to some extent this all got rolled off by Nandan, who left Infosys at the peak to become what? A shaper of ideas, right? So I think in Bangalore we've created a culture which is unique in India, where A, these kind of individuals are celebrated, they have social power. B, there is trust, everybody works with each other, and there is trust, and therefore collaborative work results in these building blocks on top of which people can build. So Aadhaar built by 22 volunteers. Imagine the most complex system, right? So that's the power of Bangalore.
Great. Mr. Valluri, you're doing something very interesting like this itself. You're working in this environment. You've created Valluri.org, which is like a system where you're trying to bring people together. So what's your experience? Do you agree with that proposition, or you have a little different point of view?
And again, I think it's important to understand, and again, I always keep focusing on execution from this 50,000 strategy definition to what needs to be done. And I think the way, at least we are approaching is, let's define 20 issues in the society that really need to get addressed, 20 problems. What are the platforms we really need to create in these 20 platforms where people can actually hook on? And it's not about a financial strategy of how are we going to raise P, VC, etc., but it's also about who are the people who can actually hook on with technology, who can actually create a full solution. So it could be in water. Fundamentally, I'm saying that these are issues for the society. Road building, lake cleaning, water, waste to energy. I mean, I have a request from Andhra, Chandrababu Naidu's team, saying that can you actually take mixed waste, convert that into gases, take gases, run our transportation? Can you actually get an engine? So we're talking to Volvo and saying, hey, can you actually remodify engine to take gases and run your transportation? So they're talking about the whole solution. Now, how do we build these platforms together where a number of organizations, technologies can actually hook on, solve that problem, and move on to the next problem? How do we actually build that whole ecosystem? And that's what we're trying to do. And we said we'll only define 5 areas. Let's not boil the ocean. Let's take a look at water. Let's take a look at waste. Let's take a look at energy, healthcare, and pollution. Right? And that's the approach. And I think nobody needs to worry about your IP getting destroyed. You're kind of violating the NDAs. The second piece to that, Amit, and if I may take just 5 seconds before you open it up, is the whole piece on manufacturing. Because, we talk about manufacturing, bringing in, Make in India, etc. And my logic is, if I look at any of the SMEs in India, in Bangalore, outside Bangalore, I kind of can challenge anybody over here if any of the SMEs runs beyond 1 shift in operation a day. You've got capacity built around this whole industry where the capacity is not being utilized. What do we need to do to actually bring this SME structure together where you can actually use the capacity and not go running about, can I get land acquisition, can I get all the approvals, can I do etc., XYZ. So if you actually look at technology convergence, manufacturing convergence, and some value analysis and value engineering convergence, what you're doing is you're creating solutions which can actually address a number of areas. So define the problem areas and then have things getting hooked up, and then you start seeing solutions actually.
Very, very interesting. Thank you. We have time for one question. So anybody has a question from the audience? So awesome. So they're all supercharged. They have it. So we'll take the last set of comments. Yes,
One 30-second issue. Unfortunately, Ravi is going to get more in his fair share of attention. So you bring him up again. How many of people in this room have heard of a guy called Daniel Kahneman? So he's one of my favorite thinkers. He's a behavioral economist who's, I think, just got a Nobel Prize. I think some of the things we're talking about is what to do in the here and the now. I think it's also important to think about how do you invest into innovation as a culture for the future. Okay. So Ravi is also involved with actually putting together a paper for the education policy for Karnataka for 2030. Okay. And two of the important things that we need to focus on if you really want to get an innovation culture by the time these guys become engineers or whatever and come out of college is the thinking facility. We focus too much, our education focuses too much on the learning and doing facility. Okay, so there is nothing which actually encourages thinking, which is really, whether you like it or not, a reasonably Western concept. The second is, in places like Singapore, in class 1, they're beginning to do Daniel Goleman classes of EQ, where thinking about yourself in the context of others is a part of education. I can't see innovation as a culture, as a defining culture for us, if we don't put these two things into place and over-focus on content learning and doing.
So what you're saying is it's about analytical thinking and so on and so forth. That needs to be
System 2 thinking, which is what Daniel Kahneman talks about.
Harish, what's your point of view? Your last 10 seconds, one thing that you would like to suggest.
No, I think, if we can get into real innovation instead of what we famously call jugaad innovation, which is finding shortcuts, as a society,
So
we will
moving
be
to real
in a
frugal
better way.
innovation, not talk about jugaad. Sharad.
I think I'll build on what Mr. Belluri said. We need challenge grants for some of these problems that he just described. And then, because what they do, they act as a forcing function for combinatorial innovation. Lots of smart people come together to solve those problems, and magic happens.
Your last 30 seconds. What do you think?
No other comments. I think that's what
Awesome. So this brings us to a close for this panel. Thanks a lot for joining us today. I think this was wonderful and sets the stage for the next thing. Thank you.